Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, if that's where you are. Welcome to the second of Asia Gaming Brief's webinar series. Just going to wait a few moments just to make sure everybody has managed to get logged on properly and are not having any technical difficulties. So just bear with us for a few more seconds. Okay, I think we're going to kick off now. So in today's event, we're going to explore the impact of the current pandemic on the Chinese tourist. In a relatively short time frame, this sector has become the key source market for gambling and tourism businesses worldwide. IR projects across the region have been devised with this demographic and their wallets in mind. So how have things changed post-COVID-19? Joining me today to discuss this, we have Dr. Wolfgang Arlt, founder and director of the China Outbound Tourism Institute, Sir Glenn McCartney, Associate Professor of International Integrated Resort Management at the University of Macau, and industry consultant Ben Lee, Managing Partner of iGamiX Management and Consulting. I'm going to ask Glenn and Ben just to say a few words by means of introduction, and then we're going to move on to a brief presentation from Wolfgang before we open up for discussion. Now, what we'd really like this to be is a very interactive forum and for you to be able to get your questions answered. So please don't wait for the end, just submit any questions you have through the Q&A function on the Zoom app at any time, and we will endeavour to get to them as we go. You can remain anonymous, although a country might be nice. If you want to identify yourself, please do. Anyway, without further ado, let's go over to Ben so he can tell us a bit more about himself.
Thank you, Sharon. So my name is Ben, as Sharon introduced, and I'm the managing partner of iGamiX Management and Consulting Limited based in Macau. We are the leading and have been the leading gaming researcher in Asia and have been supplying the Macau gaming revenue estimates to the financial community over the last 10 years. And we are also the sole supplier of gaming data on Manila gaming. And on top of that, we have also produced a lot of gaming feasibility reports for gaming projects all around Asia. So my role in today's webinar is to give an overall assessment as to what's happening around the region and what terms and conditions are currently in place for the gaming industry in the region. Thank you, Sharon.
Glenn?
Oh, thank you, Sharon. Yes, my name is Glenn McCartney. I've been in Macau since 1996, 97, so before the handover, and I've been watching and tracking the development of Macau's gaming industry during the liberalization period when I was working for the Macau government as a tourism researcher. I've been here obviously during SARS 2003, so I experienced that, the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. So I have been here for those 20 years to experience and see. My area of expertise is Chinese outbound, watching the growth in Macau since 1996, 97, and watching their motivations, travel behaviors, and also looking at government policies between Macau government and the Chinese. My area of, is integrated resorts development, when I look mostly at COTRI, but recently, the last few years, I've been to Japan doing executive training in integrated resorts to executive and government there in various cities. So that's my area of expertise, and I look forward to your questions as well.
Glenn, before we go on to Wolfgang, I believe you also have a little poll that you want to ask viewers that will come up on screen. Do you want to just give a few words on that?
Yes, a few of us actually doing research right now. We're trying to understand the impact of coronavirus on tourism, not just its impact, but also on recovery, how destinations recover. And this is very important, sharing, not just in Macau regionally, but globally. So we have 3 questions today, and we're looking at risk, uncertainty, and basically resilience. We're looking at, me and my few colleagues are going to look at researching and understanding how destinations can move fast and what type of resilience they need. So I have 3 questions. If you could kindly just, between 1 and 5, do you think about Macau as we look, because Macau is a great case study as one of the first cities outside China that we looked at a recovery phase.
Perfect. Okay, so watch out for that one, please, folks. Dr. Wolfgang, over to you.
Hello. First of all, good morning or good afternoon also from me, and welcome, and Sharon, thank you for having me. My name is Wolfgang Arlt. I'm the CEO of COTRI, that's China Outbound Tourism Research Institute. And so I've been following the development of China and China's tourism since a long time. I think the first time I've been to Macau was in 1980 when I was a student in Hong Kong. It was still a sleepy little town at that time. So obviously lots of development has happened, not only there. And of course, in the last few years, China became the #1 source market for international tourism, and certainly for Asia and gaming, the source market. And so, of course, now the question everybody's asking is, when will they come back? How can we manage in the meantime, and how, of course, can we speed up the recovery? And so I think we see some positive signs on the horizon, so not all is doom and gloom, I think.
Okay, are you going to move into your presentation? I believe you have some figures for us. So.
Yeah, so I've prepared a presentation. I will try to keep it as short as possible because I think I have colleagues here who know a lot about this topic as well, and also, of course, we want to talk and listen to what the audience has in questions. So, if you can you see the?
Yeah, we can see that fine.
Okay, very good. Okay, so let me start. Okay, here we go. So, very briefly, COTRI is an organization which has a history of 16 years, and so in a nutshell, our job is to help companies and organizations all around the world to get Chinese customers coming, make them happy, and earn money in the process. And so we have been working in many different countries and many different segments of the market. And maybe if you allow me to mention, we just published 5 different tracks of a training together with the Hong Kong Polytech University about China outbound tourism, which of course is now also updated for the COVID-19 events. So this is still, I think, a good thing to do. So for myself, just saying, yeah, I've been in China first time in 1978. I used to be a tour operator myself, and I just finished almost 20 years of being a full-time professor at universities. And you can see also, yeah, I have a couple of other hats to wear. Maybe the one I'm most proud of is that I'm a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, where Queen Elizabeth II is our boss. Okay, but so let's have a look at some trends in the Chinese outbound tourism before and after SARS coronavirus 2 has been upon us. So probably you have seen something like that before. So this from, let's say, 2004, when the institute was started, we had something like 30 million border crossings from China, but most of it going to Macau, Hong Kong, Taiwan, no, not any further. And now, last year we had 170 million, and our forecast is still that if the recovery in the second half of the year is taking place, that we will reach the same amount of travels for this year, and then we'll jump to 190 in next year. So the first trend we can see is clearly that the market is segmenting further and further. So we have 10% of the Chinese with a passport, but if you talk about Macau, of course, you don't need a passport necessarily to enter Hong Kong or Macau. And we see, and also the current surveys, I think that is an important thing. The current surveys show that what I said here, 75% of the Chinese think that traveling is improving happiness. So most Chinese say, yes, I'm very eager to travel again. And we saw last week lots of Chinese traveling domestically. So the trend that they will travel and that they will travel for different reasons will continue. And there are two ifs. One if is, of course, visa regulations, air connections. Are they able to travel? Do the other countries let them in? And the second one is it perceived as safe? And I think it's important to see, and I'm sure we will talk about this later on, it is perception of safety, not necessarily reality. So can you convince Chinese that there's a sufficient level of sanitation, of hygiene, of social distancing, and all these things to get them back? The second trend we can see, and also which has been strengthened from what we see by the recent developments, is that the group tours become less and less important. And in between group tour and FIT, a middle of the road thing that you have customized travels is becoming more and more important. So people will say, I don't have time to organize everything myself, or maybe I miss something because I'm not so familiar with the place I want to travel to, or there are things you can't organize by yourself, activities you want to undertake, so that you go to a group, goes to a tour operator, say, we want to do this, including hopefully some gaming, and that we have a trip according to our wishes, but not a catalog tour with strangers you only meet at the airport. And so from the surveys and the interviews available now, it's clear that this idea to join a package tour in the post-virus future is even more diminishing, so that people say, I want to go more self-organized. The third trend is also something which I think we will see develop further. Is it was already there before, which is from quantity to quality. So as the Chinese have now 10, 12 years of travel experience, so they are more able to know what they want. They tried out a 5-star hotel, they tried out a Airbnb, so they know what they prefer. They can compare quality from one place to another. So they are more able to know what they want, and there are already before there was a trend. Still, of course, they are spending lots of money, but that less money is going on shopping and more money is going on activities, foods, wine, cultural activities, bungee jumping, what have you. And that we can see that a lot of Chinese have been saying that the time they had to spend in isolation and maybe also in anxiety, what will happen to their health or to the health of their loved ones, has brought some people at least to the idea that there is more meaning than just shopping and just having branded goods, and you should be careful what you do with your life. It's short and it's fragile. But it has also, we also see people say, well, as I know life is short, no risk, no gain, so that they are more willing than before to say, hey, I want to do something with my life. I don't want to be a gray mouse. I want to stand out. So, which should be a good sign for gaming. Something I'm sure everybody is aware of, that China is more or less a cashless society. So mobile payment has been very important before. And now, of course, it is actively encouraged also by the government, also for sanitation reasons, that you don't have to touch money. And so this is certainly something which probably in Asia Pacific region already most companies are already accepting Alipay and WeChat Pay. So I'm based here in Hamburg in Europe. Here it's still starting, that not everybody is already accepting mobile payment, but certainly this is a trend which is again getting stronger now after the virus. Another one to talk about is that we saw a development that more and more information becomes available. A, as we just said, from simply more travel experience, but B, also, of course, that we all spend money to give information to the Chinese market on social media. The Chinese are very active in talking to each other about their travel experiences. So if you go to a travel portals like Macau or Xiongyo, so you have millions of very specific destinations. For the post-virus time, a lot of this information will have to be about sanitation, about safety. And I put just a few examples here. You can see on the left-hand side, Portugal has been one of the first countries, and I know other countries have similar things in the pipeline already, that you have a national certification for hotels and other establishments that it is clean and safe. So they have a list of criteria you have to fulfill to get this special certificate. Kempinski hotels have a policy which is called white gloves, and a part of it is that you can choose full privacy, which means that no employee of the hotel will ever enter your room. So your room service is put in front of your door, your fresh towels are put in front of your door. So obviously that's more for people who just stay 1 or 2 nights, because, well, nobody will clean your room. But also for the mini bar, if you want to have the mini bar restocked, so they will put the stuff in front of your door so that you can be sure that you are in full control who is entering your hotel room. And of course, famously, the Hong Kong airport sanitizer, this little box which looks a bit like Doctor Who, where you get a sanitizing shower. As far as I understand, at the moment that's only for employees, but this is something probably we'll see in other places. So that telling the customers what you're doing and convincing them that you do all in your power to keep them in a safe bubble, and so that they don't have to be afraid of coming to your place. The one trend which has been unfortunately very much reversed is that we saw in the last few years that more and more countries were making it easier for Chinese to enter, either by being visa-free or having multiple entry visa or e-visa or visa on arrival. So, and also that we saw that there were more and more direct air connections, especially between second-tier airports in China and second-tier airports in other countries, like, I don't know, Chengdu, Prague, something like that. Of course, this has been reversed. As we are speaking, you have only 130 international flights to China per week. So about 5,000 people can enter and leave the country every day. But if you have seen probably in the last few days, there have been announcements that next month or end of this month already, the Chinese airlines are supposed to start more international flights again. Of course, again, that depends on what the policy is of China, where Chinese are allowed under which regime to enter. So this is something certainly before we come back to the situation at the end of 2019 in terms of freedom of travel, of visa, and of also simply the number of air connections. That will take some time. So that might be for destinations, transcontinental destinations for Europe, for Africa, for North America, bad news, but for the Asia Pacific region, that might be even good news, so that more Chinese will stay in the region because it is easier to travel. So to summarize, the basic trends of Chinese outbound tourism, which were there before, will continue, except the question of visa and air transport. And for the gaming industry, the customers will come back if the infrastructure to travel is back in place, and if you can convince your customers it's safe to stay in the destination and in your accommodation in your resort in your entertainment spot. So we see that more, especially young travelers, clearly have been saying in the last weeks, family became more important for them, nature became more important for them, authenticity slowing down. But we also saw, as I mentioned, one segment saying, no risk, no gain, I want to live on the wild side more than before. And clearly the point is that, as CNN was so nice to quote me recently, so travel is still connected about social status. So the reasons why the Chinese have been traveling before are still there, and they didn't go away. So we said at the beginning, the question everybody's answering, the question everybody's asking is, when will they come back? And on the right-hand side, you see a graph from COTRI, and what they have done is that according to their bookings, that they've compared the blue line, which would be a world without the virus. So that would have been the normal development in 2020, beginning 21. And the red line is the real situation with the virus, where you can see it's plunging, but August, September coming back. And from October, COTRI is saying actually we will have 20% more Chinese outbound departures than we would have had in a normal year, simply because a lot of the trips which have not been taken now because it's not possible are not cancelled, but they are postponed. So that therefore it looks very much so that the last quarter of this year and the first quarter of next year will be very busy periods, and hopefully a good part of the money of the business we lost now will be coming a bit later. So that's all I think for introduction. So maybe like I mentioned, every week we publish something called the COTRI Weekly. Subscription is free. Please, if you want to have more information, feel free to subscribe to this. Thank you, and everybody stay healthy.
I'm just going to follow up on something on that, Wolfgang, because I think there have been recent figures just over this past weekend, which were quite interesting in terms of tourism movement in China. Can you just fill us in a little bit on those, and feel free, yes, Glenn, to jump in if you have any questions too.
Yes, of course. So yeah, so we had the May holidays, which were 5 days this year, and officially there were 115 million domestic trips. So this number, I think, well, is maybe a bit on the optimistic side, but COTRI before they said will be 90 million, and probably that's closer to reality. But certainly a huge number of Chinese have been traveling. So what we can see is from the domestic side, the Chinese are not afraid of traveling. So they started to travel again, big way, and therefore this is a good sign for us that once the international travel is back in place, that it is possible to do so, that also Chinese will start to travel internationally, with the question if we can convince them it's safe to do so. But certainly at the moment there's no other country in the world where you see these numbers of domestic tourism. Nowhere.
So I suppose the million-dollar question that we really need to figure out then is, how is this going to happen? How is the government going to relax these regulations and allow people to travel again? I think maybe Glenn or Ben, excuse me, had views on that one.
Yes, Sharon, and Wolfgang, thanks for your interesting statistics. Always great to listen to your insight there. I think, well, I mean, I've been distilling a lot of information coming out of China as well, and reports and so on. So I'll try to give my viewpoint to the audience, and I'm sure many out there may be more qualified to even speak on this. But I think one thing I've always said that this is policy driven between state governments or provinces. So first of all, is policy. And what we've seen in Macau and recently with officials in China, because I'm in Macau right now, so everybody knows we're basically on lockdown. We have been for several weeks. We really don't have much visitation, a few hundred a day, which dropped from 120,000 per day. So our casinos are open, but basically empty. So we've been on sort of waiting for several weeks already. So because, so what we have been doing, we've been looking at today I had to do an e-certification on my mobile phone. We have heat sensors at most, you know, you go to casino, heat sensors. We're all wearing masks. And so we have all these policies in place, tracking policies. People know. When I did my e-certificate this morning, it's 3 colors, red, orange or green. So we're able to tell much more about my travel if I've been in contact with somebody with coronavirus or such like this. And I think we're just trying to align our policies towards the China policies in order to make that call, as I mentioned maybe before, this corridor that we can now facilitate the flow. It has to be policy driven and it has to be with medical data. It doesn't matter, we can do crystal ball gazing, we can do positive sentiment, but really at the end of the day, it's between governments, states to make this decision. And after that, then the tourism flows we can start. And so we have to have these, we'll call these health measures in place, these cautionary measures in place. And I believe it's something we should have in place, because I've mentioned time and time again, we don't want to reset. Macau, of course, has been through 2 phases. We had the first phase of coronavirus, then we recovered, and then suddenly we have import cases. Now we're coming out of that. We've only a few cases left in Macau. So certainly Macau as a destination, we want to be cautious. We want to start with a small amount, and then we want to gradually ramp that up. And I think that's the sentiment throughout the whole industry. But again, we have to have these good policies in place that we can track, we can measure, that we understand who's coming in and who's going out. This is very important for Macau and important. So one recent thing that I mentioned before was Australia and New Zealand had this sort of bubble thing. And one province we're looking towards obviously is Guangdong. And Wolfgang will mention that's nearly 50% of visitation, one province alone, which is one of the wealthiest provinces in China. So we don't have to go for the whole package. We can start incrementally. And so people look to Guangdong, Guangzhou, and the many cities. There's over nearly 100 million people within those several cities. And I think that's a good sort of a pilot program to test our systems. So we're actually just waiting and seeing when the 2 governments can come to agreement that we can start this cross-border engagement.
I just wanted to follow up this idea, excuse me, of the bubble. I'd like to ask Ben this one really. Do you think that this is the way forward, these creation of these travel bubbles between countries that have been less impacted? I have a question from the audience actually from Barcelona, which is sort of linked to this. How is this recovery forecast by region? You know, which will be the countries that the Chinese will be allowed to go to? So.
It's a very, very good question, Sharon. And I think I'll touch on a point that Glenn mentioned, and that is it's going to be a slow recovery no matter which angle you look at. So what's happening right now is, you know, we have 2 basic questions that need to be answered when we're looking at the recovery of tourism. And number one is, you know, which jurisdiction will the Chinese feel comfortable going to? And for that, you know, you got to look at the status of the destination, the medical conditions that were reported. And the second question, more importantly, is which jurisdiction or destination will be comfortable accepting the mass hordes of Chinese visitors that they used to have or they used to enjoy. You know, Macau in 2019 has about 39.5 million visitors, of which the mainland Chinese were 27. Now, if you were to look at the rhetoric that our new chief executive is putting out, currently, we're not looking at group visas. We're looking at individual visas. Now, individual visas probably account for somewhere around just under 50% of overall Chinese visitors last year. So, but the fact that he's looking at that tells you that we are looking at a smaller volume of a lower traffic that is easily controllable. And as Glenn mentioned, we are looking to synchronize the Macau Health Declaration System together with Guangdong Province. And hopefully when that's synchronized, we can start controlling and monitoring the people that do come from Guangdong into Macau. So that leads into, the other question of which segment in the gaming industry will recover first, but just on the tourism, general tourism. So for the mainland Chinese to start going to other jurisdictions other than outside of Macau, it is inherently more difficult and more complicated. For starters, no other jurisdiction around the region I'm aware of has got this medical code in place. Secondly, there's been a low underlying blame game, not as loud as has been in the US, but certainly there were fingers pointed in terms of local social media about where this virus came from and who brought the virus into their local economy, into their local society. So, there is, as I said, the second question of which destination would be comfortable accepting the number of, the volume of Chinese traffic that they used to have going forward. Now, sorry, your question, Sharon, was
this creation of the bubble. I think you've answered it really,
yeah.
Just the way we figure out which countries will be the safe destinations for the Chinese to travel to. You did touch on discrimination there. We have a question from a Chinese student who was very keen to know is how much of an impact is that going to play in terms of which countries get the Chinese tourists in future? These discriminations. Wolfgang, would you like to go?
Yeah. I think also follow up on what Ben has said. So at the beginning of the story in January and early February, it was we were afraid of the Chinese, and then of course it turned around, and now it's the Chinese are afraid of us. so and they closed the border because they said, well, all the cases we have are imported, like what you just said from Macau as well. So at the moment, the last one's coming across the Russian border into Heilongjiang. But also before, mostly Chinese people coming back from Italy or from other countries being infected. So that it is therefore clearly some mistrust on both sides. But I think this is related that at the moment people are mistrusting anybody. So because everybody can be dangerous for me because he might have the virus. He might be the person, or she might be the person infecting me. So therefore, what I can say from Germany at least, and from other European countries, the good news is that there have been no widespread incidents that people, Chinese people or Chinese-looking people, Asian-looking people have been attacked verbally or physically. So we have Chinese, of course, colleagues working in the institute, and I have asking them several times, do people on the street and in the metro, do they look at you and or do they say something, go away, you bloody Chinese, brought this stuff to us? This didn't happen, fortunately. Certainly there will be blame games played, not only in America, but a lot there. But it is, from my perception, it has not reached the dimension that everybody is pointing fingers at the Chinese, because it became such a widespread global pandemic. And I think in many countries people have been saying, well, we were not fast enough to react to this. So and now if it is not contained, that's because we are not acting responsibly enough. So it is not the Chinese to blame for this now. But this is something where I think when we can reopen the border, at least for Europe, I don't expect that there will be a massive reluctance to accept Chinese people back into the region. And I think
as well, from the other side, from the Chinese psyche, in their minds, are they going to not travel to certain destinations because they perceive that they have been badly portrayed?
Yeah, I think there will be destinations which will be perceived as having been more showing more solidarity with the Chinese at the beginning, or Thailand, which kept the border open for a very long time. So there will be certainly, I think that will be one part of the evaluation where to go to, is how friendly have these people been to us. And I talked to a tour operator from Serbia, and he said, and Serbia has been visa-free for the Chinese, and he said, well, he thinks that in the next couple of weeks, Serbia will open the border again for Chinese visitors. So, and they have been always some special friends of the Chinese, Silk Road and all this stuff. So, and I think that will be at least for the next year and a half, that will be something which will be important. But one more point, if hopefully in the next 6 months, 9 months, we get to a vaccine and we can control the thing and it goes down to the level of a normal flu as a threat. Tourism has shown in the past to have a short memory. So, and so that if we can hopefully get on top of that problem, I don't think then in 2022 we will still talk about sanitation and this kind of things.
Okay, I have questions coming in thick and fast. Actually, I'm trying to get to them in a way that makes sense based on what we've been discussing. But this is one that I would like to get to because it's a slightly different tack, and it's, you know, we've seen the economic figures come out of China. Most of the business for the integrated resorts around Asia are very key on the small business owners and the entrepreneurs in that sector. What impact has the virus had on the business failures on demand from that perspective? Don't know whether Glenn or Ben wants to answer that one.
You mean on customer profiles? You mean?
I mean, have they, basically what it comes down to, have they still got the money to travel?
Okay.
Yes.
Maybe,
yeah, go ahead. Yes.
I was just going to say, we researched that and we talked to basically our people on the ground in Macau and over in China. So one aspect that we have to remember is that even before COVID-19, the economy in Guangdong and Macau had already been impacted by the trade war that was incepted in early 2018 between the US and China. And the effect of that was that we saw declining GGR growth, and more importantly in the VIP segment for the gaming revenue in Macau. So the further we delve in that, what we found out was that the manufacturers and exporters, who are essentially the breadbasket for Macau and who form the bulk of our VIP players and premium mass, they turn their concentration and attention towards relocating their businesses out of Guangdong to Indochina. And as a result, what we saw was the junket operators in Macau actually followed their customers to Indochina, particularly to Vietnam and Cambodia. And we started to see a rise in the gaming business in those two countries. Now, by the end of towards the late second half of 2019, we started to see the rapid rise of gaming revenue in those two countries, to the point where for some of the big junket operators in Macau, Vietnam and Cambodia equal about 10 to 15% of their revenue in Macau. That's quite significant. Now, and some of the junket operators are in turn about to launch their own casinos in the short coming future. But coming back to this business, so when COVID-19 happened, it already impacted an industry that was in the process of moving to another jurisdiction. And when COVID-19 happened, what it did was it cut into not only the savings of the mass market, but more importantly, it cut into the business the entrepreneurs, the VIP and the premium mass. Going forward, they will need to conserve their capital to re-energize their business before they're then able to be in a position to have the ability to spend on gaming, and more importantly, the time to spend on gaming, because they have to focus everything back on the business. Now, projecting forward, what that means is that increasing commission is not gonna encourage those VIPs to come back, because they don't have the time nor the capital. What may stir and motivate them is increased credit. And to cut a long story short, we see the next battleground to stimulate demand for gaming back to Macau and to the region is in credit.
Interesting. And staying with Macau, I mean, it's often been said that it will be those VIPs who lead the recovery and not the mass. Can you comment a little bit on that, perhaps, Glenn? And also, I have a question from a reader again, saying that, asking whether Macau's heavy reliance on mainland China for its tourism source markets, is that negative or positive post-COVID?
Maybe I'll start off with the second one, because one of the things is as we look to China, I would say the VIP, the premium mass, middle mass will be one of the biggest segments to aid the recovery of Macau. And over the years, when I first came to Macau, we had only 1 or 2 million visitors from China. Today, of course, you heard the statistics. So our penetration rate in China is actually very low, first, second, third tier cities. So I still think we still have a lot of marketing action to do within China for Macau. Macau has, let me say, as we said, is heavily repeated. We say we may have 20 million visitors, but maybe they're 4 or 5 times a year, these visitors. So they're visitation numbers, not visitor numbers. So Macau has a very loyal framework of visitation. So I think one of the things that the operators will be doing over these 2 months, the last 2 or 3 months of downtime, is to consider about how our marketing strategy, second, third tier cities, our growth strategy in China, because we have a tremendous growth strategy. We have over 100 million people. We would go to other places, not Macau. And as Wolfgang says, we're a gaming entertainment city. So it's not for everybody's taste, but I still think we have a lot. China's massive. We have 4 or 5 very good locations, as Wolfgang showed on his map, to go to, and have a lot more marketing to do. But as you know, the sensitivity of marketing casinos in China, so it's very slow progress because you can't actively promote. So I still think Macau, with all its recent capital investments the last year or two, growth in all the various integrated resorts have been spending a lot on amenities and expansions. I think it's Macau, you will see a lot more of growth there. So I'm not maybe as pessimistic as Ben about we have competition in the region, but I think Macau, and we have to look at the Hengqin Island. When I look at my analysis, I look at the Hengqin Island development, what's going on there in non-gaming. So you have to look at the Greater Bay Area, which is what I'm going to just mention your question there. Recently, we've had indications from the government of the Greater Bay Area being a focus. So if anything at all, and I said over the years, Macau will become more reliant on China. We have 70% of our visitation is from China already. And I don't see that digit moving. In fact, I think it even much more. And I think that's part of probably why we will recover very well over the coming months, because we will look at China much more, the Greater Bay Area. And I look at the Guangdong Airport, I look at the Shenzhen Airport, I look at Zhuhai Airport, and I look at the high-speed rail, and I look at the road networks, and everything is funneling down to Macau. I'm extremely optimistic in the second half if the policy measures are put in place, though we have enough when it comes to tourism systems, transportation modes. We have enough we call potential market. We have a current market which has I heard the revenge shopping is taking place. That's what I call it, pent-up demand in China, where people are really shopping because the last 4 or 5 months they didn't, and they have a lot of money and they want to go out now and spend. And I believe that will also be something that Macau can benefit from too. So I see it's much more complex in understanding the whole marketing frame. So when I look at the picture, I would have to look at many of those dimensions to put a much more what's going to happen in Q3 to Q4. And adding on to that, I'm thinking Q3, Q4, are we looking ahead of the game? What's going to happen in October for the Golden Weeks. You know, so we should be not just thinking now, but we're also thinking about the recovery Q3, Q4, and going into the next year. So our strategy is much more lengthier when we look at recovery.
If I could help answer that question as well, and I'll disagree with you a little bit on the focus, Glenn. So yes, the reality is that, as you said, we are 70% of our business come from China. But if you were to look at the gaming industry, which accounts for the bulk of our public revenue, I would probably say that about somewhere between 80 to 90% of our gaming revenue actually comes from China. And when China permitted Macau to grant the gaming concessions, the intent was for Macau to become an international tourism center for tourism and destination for tourism. But what we have become is actually a destination for mainland Chinese. So the question, the political question is that the intent of the people in position of power, that we would become so dependent on A, one single market, and B, is the side outcome of that being the fact that our economy is now so dependent on one sector of one particular industry. So going forward in terms of marketing, I agree with you. There is a problem with marketing casinos in China. In fact, I don't know if people are aware, but it is illegal for all mainland Chinese to gamble anywhere in the world, even Macau. You know, that is a very little known law. And the fact that the mainland China has decided to turn a blind eye to that is, you know, it speaks, basically, it bodes well for us, but it is still illegal. So going forward, I think the intention is still to develop Macau, but for Macau to progress and develop, we really need to turn our eye towards the region and the world outside of China. And to do that, we've got, I mean, it's a low-hanging fruit, right? Every operator, everybody in the industry has gone to China because it's right next door, it's easy, and as I say, you open the doors, build it, and they'll come because we don't have to do any marketing. And, you know, but for us to basically refocus from China into the greater region, we actually have to spend some money and resources marketing and promoting ourselves to the greater region, something that we haven't done at all.
I agree with Ben, but there's something, when I look at Guangzhou Airport, which is a tremendous airport, and the international flights and regional flights, for example, we're very near to Guangzhou Airport and Zhuhai Airport and Shenzhen
Yes.
Airport. So I believe that these types of travel hubs can be beneficial to Macau regionally as well, if we have that collaborative platforms and partnerships in place. We've seen the Hong Kong airport develop, and we have that bridge coming over, but also we have the Greater Bay Area development as well. I think can be very positive to Macau too. And I think as a hospitality provider, gaming provider, those airports are also access points and hubs for Macau as well to enlarge its travel market, not just the Chinese travel market. But I think one of the things today is people are asking is, how does destinations recover? So yeah, and I think it's very important to look at these aspects.
I'm having quite a few questions coming in based around marketing, especially from Europe actually, obviously keen to get the Chinese coming back. How do they invest in their brands, in their communication, in their marketing strategies to target the Chinese now? Perhaps Wolfgang can answer that one.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, maybe to widen the horizon a bit from not only talking about Macau. So I think certainly I would agree with what Ben said, that for many VIP people, they're very, very busy at the moment to keep their the game together. On the other hand, I think it's clear for most Chinese outbound travelers, they're not paying for the trips from their current income, from the monthly wage. They're paying it from their wealth, from the money they have in their bank account they earned before with real estate deals or whatever. So I think for the question, do the Chinese have enough money? This, of course, has been a question already asked last year with the GDP going down. I think what we see is that people are still saying, well, to spend a few $1,000s on a trip, I can still afford that, and I'm still happy to spend this money. I'm not afraid to spend this money. Maybe not spending $100,000 on a trip to Antarctica or something like that anymore so easily. But so I think therefore this will still be the case, that they travel and but of course gamble at the same time. So for the wider area, I think for what we are telling people now all the time is, with the gap, with the dent we have now, that nothing's happening to the output market, now is the time to prepare for the next wave coming. We saw this graph from C-Trip with the October Golden Week, the latest, that there will be maybe more than ever before Chinese people are coming. So and very often what we see, people come to us and say, help me with the marketing. And most of the time we say, wait a minute, let's have a look at your product first. And so, and it's, I think the time now is for international destinations, not only neighbors of China, to take a step back. Now we have the time for that, and say, okay, how much have we successfully adapted our product to the Chinese market? And especially now, what I try to say in my presentation, with some of the demand structure changing after the virus, some of the ideas in the Chinese society changing. So have I adapted to this new trends in the Chinese market? And this is what you have to do. And then after you have done that, and we use the training we're offering for that to say, you can have, this is a answer with a certification from the Hong Kong Polio famous university. It's a, you can show your customers, look, I have a university certification that I have been preparing for this market, and of course many other things as well. That this is something which is important, and it is not only the question which key influencer, which key opinion leader should I pay for to say how wonderful we are, but that you first have to work on what are you offering to the Chinese people. And I think this will have a big impact on where the Chinese travel and where they travel first when it becomes normal again to do so.
Can I throw something in there? I was just listening to Professor Wolfgang. One of the key things, and comes back to something you mentioned earlier, that there's a lot of trips rebounding in China, and a high proportion of that is road trip, travel by car. I'm wondering, because of the high profile of secondary infections as a result of plane travel, and the airline industry has dived into an abyss. I'm just wondering how long it would be and what measures the airline industry actually has to take to make people feel comfortable. So the question about, you know, how to attract people to Germany or to Europe or to some other jurisdiction is, how do you actually get people to feel comfortable leaving China to fly to your jurisdiction? I think that's going to be a challenging question posed to the industry.
Yeah, but if I see all the photos which were sent around the last few days of domestic air transport in China, what you see, people wear a mask and the middle seat is empty, and the stewardesses look like astronauts, and it seems the Chinese are happy to sit in this aircraft, and there's no difference if this aircraft is flying from Beijing to Sanya, or it's flying from Beijing to Seoul. That is makes no difference. In terms of the risk taking, so therefore I think, of course, yes, you have to be sure that you tell the customers again and again what you're doing, and that of course you have to wear a mask, so there will be no food on the aircraft because you can't eat with a mask on, and stuff like that. And yes, it will be a hurdle we have to jump over, but I don't think it is an insurmountable problem.
you know, and just adding on, because I've talked to some European countries and say, how are we China ready? And it's not just like, as Wolfgang says, you have to really do a stock list of your products, your services, the type of Chinese culinary restaurants you have, Chinese speaking staff, and all the touch points that are really important for the Chinese consumer. And I think one thing we've seen much more the last 3 months is online social media in China has been a big uplift in Weibo, WeChat. The WeChat ecosystem is really interesting to look at how people are using that. We look at Douyin, and you know, people are live streaming events in China, you know, so DJs are doing clubbing over mobile phones. Movies are downloaded now on your mobile phone in China. So how people now are really much more engaged with their iPhone. So to that question for that person who asked, how do you market to Chinese people? I think one of the issues is you really have to get into the social media ecosystem, much understand about how they interact, how they become less passive now, more active in the ecosystem, and I think there will be some of your answers towards how do you attract the Chinese consumer to your desk, given what Ben said about safety, Wolfgang says about products, but also how the channel and how do you convince them in the end to come.
And following on from that, because I do have another question from an audience member here, they want to know exactly what changes are going to have to be applied in land-based casinos to get the Chinese to be confident in coming back.
What Macau's done already. So I think Macau's casinos are ready, very much ready. They have done 2 months of preparation, they've sent the signals, they already know. And I think Macau has a very luxurious, very, very exclusive type of product already. So the customers knows what they're going to get. So the casinos have been ready. I walked by one today. I can see the gaming floor, masks are on, the chairs are separated, the heat sensors are there. I got heat censored as well when I came in. So the systems are, the gaming industry is ready. Now we just need to see the policy being implemented, and then of course then monitor, watch and feedback to make sure, like I said at the beginning, that we don't reset the dial, that we can make sure we can keep going forward in a very cautious approach, talking to the medical and also talking to government and keeping that dialogue going.
I agree with Glenn. I agree with Glenn in that Macau has been a leader in terms of the precautions taken, and I think going forward to instill the confidence in the target consumer or customer segments, they have to adopt, land-based casinos will have to adopt some of the measures that are currently in place. We're talking about the social distancing and beyond and above that, the temperature screening. At the moment, you know, you go through the different exits and entrances to casino, you get a temperature check with a thermometer gun. An associate of mine, we've been talking to the Cambodian government, and part of the rules we've proposed to them is that the casinos put in thermal scans, not thermometer guns, computer thermal scans, not just for the customers, but for the staff as well, bearing in mind that the staff could be a hub for the transmission. So these are the factors that casinos will have to consider for both their staff and for the customers going forward.
And what kind of impacts that's going to have on revenue though, Ben, when you have to have sort of gaps in tables, gaps in slot machines?
Obviously, it's going to reduce your profit margin, particularly in the mass segment. In the VIP segment, it will have very, very little impact because the VIPs tend not to crowd around tables anyway. So the average number of players per VIP table is probably around 2 or 3, which is what the social distancing currently stands at. But for the mass, when you go to some of the mass-focused casinos in Macau, and not just Macau, but around the region as well, you know, you could get about 20, 30 people crowded around a single table during the busy time of year. So with social distancing, that will obviously reduce the number of people that can play at a particular table and reduce the profitability in terms of revenue versus cost of those individual mass tables, and bring up the profit margin for those operators who are focused on the mass market.
And looking at, this is another, I've given questions thick and fast actually, I'm struggling to get to them all, but in terms of preparing for the future, I mean, this is probably not going to go away anytime soon. What can many of the bars and restaurants that have been really badly hit do to prepare for the future and to make sure that they're safe for Chinese travelers? I don't know who wants to answer that. Maybe Glenn, Wolfgang?
In Macau, I mentioned before, our bars and restaurants have reopened. The one, you know, if it was financially feasible, some of them are opening now. And so one more will open up as we get visitation back. So we have reopened. And again, coming back to what Ben said, and we have all these measures in place. We have to be pragmatic. I think as the travel industry over the years, we were very pragmatic when we got on air. We knew that some years back we had to go to an airport 2 hours before check-in, and we're not allowed to bring liquids on board. And we have to be pragmatic now. This is the new norm. And this is, if you want to travel, this is what you have to do. If you want to go into a casino, this is what you have to do. And Chinese, we're very pragmatic. This is what we will do. I think it's how travel industry moves along. And I think we go to restaurants, again, there's a level of all the waiters and waitresses are wearing masks. We don't get heat guns. We have heat scanners coming to like the gaming, we get scan coming in, but there's heat guns as well. So all of these pragmatic, we have our e-certificates, but in case we have to watch about how, if you're at a dining experience, how we try to minimize the experience of our customer. Of course, that's the big challenge, that you have all of these measures in place, but you still want to have a good dining experience or a good gaming experience. And we haven't talked about the event industry, the entertainment industry, the convention industry, which is all part and parcel of the tourism industry. How does that recover, and how will that look like as well? Because that will obviously have a change. But most importantly, the customer's experience is like, how do we put that in and make sure that they have a quality dining, or go to a trade show? We've seen some also that happening recently in China, about how do you recover from those as well? Maybe.
Yeah. And in terms of jurisdictions, we have touched on this before, but I do have another more specific question from an audience member for Ben, actually. We've seen the shift to Vietnam and Cambodia. Is that going to continue post-COVID? And what about the Philippines? How will that be considered as a destination? Is it a safe destination for the Chinese?
I think that last part of the statement is the key. So it's the perception of safety, previously safety, and now medical safety as well. So Vietnam has basically, I think, zero death. And speaking to the operators on the ground, the numbers are quite consistent and quite believable. So the operators, the expats in Vietnam are actually, they reckon the stats are quite reliable. So Vietnam has 271 cases with no deaths. And the fact is they have allowed the casinos to reopen. So Crown in Da Nang has reopened, Corona in Phu Quoc has reopened. Now it's interesting, but Ho Tram previously was, together with all the other casinos, were supposed to be shut down, but they managed to get an exemption from the local province. Now, with that sort of stats, I don't think there will be a problem with anybody going to Vietnam in terms of the possibility of community infection. Manila, Philippines, on the other hand, is a different kettle of fish, and likewise Cambodia. So Cambodia reported around 122 cases with zero deaths. But again, speaking to the people on the ground, they don't place a high degree of reliability on that figure because there's not sufficient testing being done. In fact, there was a flight about a month ago of 155 packs back to China, and upon arrival, 30-something of those packs were tested positive. So there is a question of credibility, and it's the same with the Philippines. In terms of the likelihood of people going back to those two countries, I don't think there'll be a degree of confidence in doing so for a while. Not that there was a lot of mainland Chinese going to Manila to gamble in the land-based casinos. The industry there is very different. It is more online, pogo. And they are talking about resuming pogo. So it's a very different kettle of fish. So Back to land-based casino, the casino in Cambodia is still shut. There's still a great degree of community infection that hasn't been discovered yet. So it may be a while before anybody will feel comfortable going back to Cambodia. But Vietnam, they are just starting to reopen. And when the flights resume and when the Chinese outbound tours start happening again, I think Vietnam will, together with Macau, be one of the first destination that we'll go to.
You any idea, Ben, just a quick follow-up on that one, what kind of visitation they're seeing in these casinos now they've opened them up again?
They've opened up again, but not in terms of foreigners. So Corona is half and half. They do get a degree of local travel. It's too early, and I haven't got the information yet. But in terms of a whole trend, they're getting good visitation numbers, but they're mainly expats from Ho Chi Minh City, nearby Ho Chi Minh City.
But there's also, I think, what we discussed before as part of the answer, the bubble. So it might be that people are not so confident to go to Philippines, but maybe to some specific place. And if you tell them, okay, from the airport, there's safe transport to the resort, and there everybody is extra screened and extra safe, and then you go back from there directly to the airport, so you don't touch on normal local people there because they might be dangerous for you. I think this is a concept which is discussed in many places and which might also work there. So especially for gaming resorts, that you say, you're not saying come back to the Philippines, but you say come back to us, and we make sure that you are in a cocoon, and we keep you safe all the time, and you don't talk about the country, but you talk about your premises, and then so that might be in between one way to get the more brave people already traveling.
As a side note, I think there's an interesting concept out there, and I think you may have touched on it, Professor Wolfgang. I noticed that one of the boutique, very, very upmarket luxury hotel chain has started issuing gift vouchers or e-gifts that you can buy and give to anybody, use it yourself, and it's 50% off. And you can use, and the vouchers are redeemable up to the end of 2021, right? So it has a very long shelf life. And I, in fact, have jumped in and bought a couple myself. And that could be a way for the casinos to actually fill the pipeline, which at the moment stands empty.
Right, I'm just well aware that I have questions coming in and we're not going to get to all of them. So what I might do, if we haven't got to your question, I might email them to the individual participants afterwards, and then perhaps if they could be so kind, they could perhaps answer them for you. I would like to just finish up though by asking this interesting question. It is a Macau focused question again, and they point out that the Macau recovered very quickly after SARS because they introduced the individual visit scheme. Do we think there is any chance of a similar kind of measure to be introduced post-COVID to help recovery of the market? I'd start with Glenn on this one, I think, and then perhaps you two could both wrap up your final comments.
Yeah, I understand it because I was here during SARS, so I realized that policy was put in place and it really helped Macau, and you see the visitation after that. Again, that's a policy measure, and that's very important as we speak today. That's not gaming operators, that's policy measures. And I think we may see what call, coming back to this, sorry, repeating again, a bubble, a province to Macau. We can pick which ones, because within China we're able to, say you're from Guangzhou, you're from Dongguan, you're from Zhuhai, Shenzhen. So we're able to know that, and so we're able to show that on your travel data. And so yes, I believe that will be a measure showing where are you from of least risk. And so I think that's the thing. Globally, we have to look at province to province, state to state. Coming back to what Wolfgang says too, maybe it'll be much more like this bubble or corridor tourism, where you'll see ones where you'll see people being transported to it from a place to a place. But can I just say one very important thing here? And what I have seen at play and much more is there's a lot of people involved in this, not just governments. You know, you have transportation providers, airlines. And one thing I think if you're going to see recovery and quick recovery and speed of recovery is these type of task force, which I see around the world happening now, where they get together and they work on the problem of recovery. Because you can't get somebody to, you can't get the airline and the airplane and get the transportation mode to the safe location. That has to be a lot of moving parts. And it's not just government driven, it's going to be private sector driven. You've seen some of the hotels, vouchers, around the world, some are offering vouchers up front and as a means to get equity coming in. But so I think we have a lot more of big picture thinking about how do we bring in all these people to aid the recovery. So, sorry, coming back to that question again, yes, I think it'll be a way of recovery for Macau to look at province or certain locations within China that are safer for Macau to start, you know, not like piloting, but to make sure a more cautious approach to recovery.
So in terms of recovery post-SARS, what happened was that before that, we didn't really have access to the China market. We had access to the China market this time around, and the difference is that, as I mentioned earlier, the economy has taken a very sharp and big hit. And going forward, it is there's a big question mark as to whether China itself and its economy will recover to the pre-COVID level. We are looking at a possibility of countries such as Japan, US, and possibly even EU looking to switch their supply chain back to their home jurisdiction. We're looking at, as I said, in the relocation of the manufacturing industries out of Guangdong, which is our bread basket into Southeast Asia. Now, on top of that, if we're talking about freeing up more IVS cities, at the moment we already have access to 49 cities and provinces, municipalities in China who can come to Macau freely under the IVS scheme, except for the Guangdongers, who are allowed only once every 2 months. Freeing up more cities, or including more cities, particularly the second tier and third tier, into the IVS scheme, I don't think it's going to result in any meaningful increase in potential revenue for the gaming industry. But there is one very critical element in that, as I mentioned, the Guangdongers who are our bread and butter, they are allowed to enter Macau only once every 2 months. If China wanted to boost Macau, all they have to do is to remove that prohibition and allow the Guangdongers to come to Macau as many times as they like, or as many times as they can enter neighboring Hong Kong. And that could be critical to giving Macau a booster recovery.
Probability, Ben, if you had to make a guess?
Well, it sounds like the chief executive is talking to Guangdong, but I believe the constraint on the Guangdongers coming is actually higher up. I would say maybe probably in excess of slightly above 50%, given that our industry right now is really suffering from shell shock. And opening up the IVS is going to reinvigorate the VIP segment. Now, still early days, but our estimate is that coming back to the VIP versus mass, VIP historically used to be 70% of gaming revenue, dropped down to 45% in about 2015 to 16. And interestingly, in April last month, it recovered to 57% of gross gaming revenue, but it's still very early days, and that's a very, very small number to go off anyway. But going forward, for there to be a meaningful recovery, given what I said about lack of capital, lack of and the relocation of businesses, if Macau really wanted to ramp up its recovery, and if it's able to convince both Guangdong and Beijing to let us have it, even a simple one IVS visit to Macau every month could see a huge boost to our recovery. And I would give that probability above 50% right now.
Okay, well, I am going to have to wrap this up. I don't know whether either Glenn or Wolfgang wants to say any final words.
Yeah, I think listening to all this, we all agree policy is important for that. And the point is also, some good news is that I think with this crisis, for the first time, tourism industry has been accepted by politicians around the world as a major industry, something you have to take care of. So UNWTO, the boss for the first time has been speaking in the European Parliament. We have in Europe for the first time a massive amount of money being spent on saving the airlines, like Lufthansa in Germany, for instance. And so this is something which is a positive thing, that the fact that the policies have to be supportive to the restart of tourism, this is something which I think in 2003, nobody was, no politicians were interested in that. As our industry totally has become so much more important and so much bigger. So this, I think, is a good sign that we are now in the focus. We're no longer under the radar of the politicians around the world. That, I think, will help us also to recover.
Perfect. Glenn, do you have any final comments?
Yes, and I apologize to your listeners if I've been too Macau-centric, but or regional, but and we have a short time, and we would love to speak more to them. As I look at Macau, for those people more interested in Macau and regional, I think I look at the Greater Bay Area and doing some research in Greater Bay Area and Hengqin Island. So there's a level of great confidence of what we're trying to establish at this part called the Bay Area. So I think that in itself is very encouraging, as there's a lot of construction and transportation movement towards that, and I think that offers a lot of potential for Macau. Don't have time to talk through all of that. So I think that's going to be a big issue to look at. And I think one thing too, I think the gaming operators in the days ahead, the weeks ahead, the day when they say, Glenn, we broke even today, you know, that will be a wonderful sign, because they're losing millions every week. So I think that will be a sign we broke even, and now we can see we're moving towards recovery. So those are positive measures that we look towards. Like, oh, now we're over break even. And I think that's what we look towards as a positive measure. And after that, we look at more ramping up, you know, as we move forward. Of course, we look for profitability, but I think we're looking for start the visitation.
Perfect. Well, I guess then I think you'll all see the poll on your screens. So if you wouldn't mind just taking a few seconds to click on those 3 questions, that would be enormously helpful for Glenn and his team. I'd just like to give a really big thanks to our panelists this morning. I think they've given an amazing overview and insight into the Chinese and their travel patterns. And well, it looks like the demand is still there. There's a big question mark over when they will come back, and that's going to be policy driven. We've obviously been through a few possibilities of how that might actually look and take shape in the future. So thank you very much for joining us again. Our next webinar will be on May the 28th, and this time we're going to be looking at esports. Some of you may know they are amongst the best performing areas at the moment, given just about every other global sporting event has been cancelled. So please stay tuned for more details on that, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you all.